In the early 20th century, Europe was a continent, still healing from the wounds of a massive war. One country in particular found itself in a state of turmoil. The economy was shattered, inflation was out of control, and people were struggling just to get by. The terms of the peace treaty that ended the war had left a deep sense of national humiliation. It was a time of great uncertainty and hardship, a fertile ground for new extreme ideas to take root. This is the story of how, in the midst of this chaos, one man rose from obscurity to become one of the most powerful figures of his time. His story begins not in the halls of power, but in a small town. Born into a modest family, his childhood was marked by difficulty and loss. He had a strained relationship with his father, who had a clear vision for his son's future as a civil servant, but the young boy had other dreams. He dreamed of becoming an artist. He loved to draw and paint, seeing a future for himself filled with creativity and beauty. After his father's passing, he moved to the capital city, hoping to gain admission to a prestigious art academy. He applied with high hopes, but his dreams were soon crushed. He was rejected, not once, but twice. The academy's examiners felt his talents were more suited for architecture, but lacking the necessary academic credentials, that path was also closed to him. Alone in a big city, without a clear path forward, he struggled to make a living, selling his paintings and postcards on the streets just to earn enough for food and a room in a men's shelter. These were years of poverty and frustration, a period that would profoundly shape his worldview and his future ambitions. When the Great War erupted across Europe in 1914, it offered him a new sense of purpose. Eager to serve, he volunteered for the army and was sent to the front lines. He served as a dispatch runner, a dangerous job that required him to carry messages between trenches under heavy fire. He was considered a brave soldier by his superiors, earning medals for his courage. But the war also left its mark on him. He was wounded twice, once in the leg and later temporarily blinded in a gas attack. It was while he was recovering in a hospital that he heard the news. The war was over and his country had surrendered. The news devastated him, filling him with a sense of betrayal. He, along with many of his fellow soldiers, believed their sacrifice had been in vain, sold out by politicians and revolutionaries back home. This deep-seated resentment would become a driving force in his life. After the war, he returned to a country he barely recognized. The old empire was gone, replaced by a new, fragile republic. The political scene was chaotic, with dozens of small parties vying for influence. Still officially in the army, his job was to monitor these new political groups. One evening, his assignment led him to a small gathering of a new party in a local beer hall. The group was tiny, its ideas a mix of nationalism and anti-capitalism. Initially unimpressed, he found himself drawn into the debate. When one speaker suggested a region should break away from the country, he was overcome with anger and delivered a passionate, impromptu speech in response. The party leaders were impressed by his fiery speaking ability. They saw potential in this unknown soldier and invited him to join. He soon became the party's chief propagandist and speaker. He had a talent for tapping into the public's fears and frustrations. He spoke of national pride, of the humiliation of defeat, and of the economic hardships people were facing every day. His speeches, delivered with intense energy, began to attract larger and larger crowds. People who felt lost and ignored found a voice in his words. He promised to restore the nation's greatness, to tear up the hated peace treaty, and to create a strong, unified country once more. The small political group began to grow, its membership swelling with those who were desperate for change. As his influence grew, so did his ambition. He believed that the time was right to seize power directly. In 1923, inspired by a similar event in another country, he and his followers attempted to overthrow the regional government in a bold but poorly planned coup. The attempt failed spectacularly. The authorities quickly suppressed the uprising, and in the ensuing chaos, several of his supporters were killed. He was arrested and put on trial for treason. The trial, however, turned into a public spectacle. He used the courtroom as a stage, delivering long speeches that were reported in newspapers across the country. He portrayed himself as a patriot, acting in the nation's best interest. While he was found guilty, he received a surprisingly light sentence of 5 years in a comfortable prison. His time in prison was not idle. It was here that he began to write a book, a sprawling work that was part autobiography, part political manifesto. In its pages, he laid out his radical ideas and his vision for the future. He detailed his ideology, his views on race, and his plans for national expansion. The book was a blueprint for his future actions, outlining his belief in the need for a single, all-powerful leader to guide the nation. Upon his release after serving less than a year, he found his political party banned and his movement in disarray. He realized that a direct seizure of power was not the answer. He needed a new strategy. From then on, he decided to gain power through legal means, through the ballot box. He rebuilt his political party, focusing on discipline and organization. He established youth groups, professional associations, and paramilitary wings, creating a movement that permeated every aspect of society. For years, his party remained on the fringes of politics, winning only a small percentage of the vote in national elections. The country's economy had stabilized, and there was less appetite for radical change. But then, disaster struck. The global economic crash of 1929 plunged the world into the Great Depression. His country was hit especially hard. Businesses failed, banks collapsed, and millions of people lost their jobs and their life savings. The widespread suffering and despair created the perfect storm for his movement. As the established political parties struggled to find a solution, his message found a newly receptive audience. He promised jobs, stability, and a return to national glory. His rallies became massive spectacles, with thousands of uniformed followers, dramatic music, and torchlight parades, all designed to project an image of strength and order in a time of chaos. In the elections that followed, his party's share of the vote skyrocketed. Suddenly, they were no longer a fringe group, but one of the largest political forces in the country. The traditional political elites, underestimating him and thinking they could control him, made a fateful decision. In early 1933, they appointed him to the highest office in the government, believing he would be a temporary figurehead they could easily manipulate. They could not have been more wrong. Once in power, he moved swiftly to consolidate his authority, using a fire in the Parliament building as a pretext to suspend civil liberties and silence his opponents. Within a few short months, the fragile democracy was dismantled, and he had established a total dictatorship. The young boy who had failed to become an artist had now become the absolute ruler of a major European nation. His rise to power was complete, but his story was far from over. The world would soon learn the devastating consequences of his ambition. How did he transform his country so quickly, and what were the events that led the world into another catastrophic war? Find out in Part 2. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe for more deep dives into history.